Sometimes you don't know something as a warning until it's already too late. Welcome in. This channel is all about real 4chan stories from people who experience something they still can't forget. What follows starts simple enough, but the atmosphere changes before you even notice it. Make yourself comfortable, turn the lights down, and subscribe for more unsettling stories. Let's get started. The sample had been sitting in evidence for 22 years before I opened the tube. That part isn't strange. In our lab, on the second floor of a building off Market Street in downtown St. Louis, we have shelves of cold cases going back to the 70s. What's strange is what came out of the machine after I ran it. I should back up. I work in a forensic DNA unit. Most of my job is boring in a way people don't understand. You sit at a bench, you pipette, you wait, you read output, you write reports. When TV shows want to make it exciting, they put a rock song under it. In real life, it's fluorescent lights and the hum of a refrigerated centrifuge and someone eating a sandwich at the next station. In March 2021, we were catching up on a backlog the pandemic had made worse. My supervisor, Kim, dropped a file on my bench and said, "This one's yours if you want it." I wanted it. Cold cases are the reason most of us took this job in the first place. The file was a 1999 homicide out of a neighborhood in North County. Young woman, found in her apartment, no forced entry. Original investigators had a suspect, but never enough to charge. There was one sealed evidence tube, subsource sample, collected properly, chain of custody clean. In 1999, the lab that touched it couldn't do much with it. The tech was primitive by our standards. Autosomal STR kits then read maybe 13 loci. Today, we routinely run 24. More loci means more discriminating power. More discriminating power means you can pull a name out of noise that used to be too weak to identify. I did the extraction on a Tuesday, quantified it Wednesday. Nice yield, no inhibition. I loaded the plate that afternoon and let it run overnight. Thursday morning, I opened the file, and I stared at my screen for maybe 10 minutes without moving. The profile was clean. That was the first thing. Full profile, all loci called, no dropout, no drop-in. Beautiful data. If a defense attorney ever wanted a textbook example of a solid single-source result, this would be it. The problem was the profile itself. There's a value we calculate called random match probability. It's basically the odds that a random person off the street would match a given profile by chance. For a full profile on 20+ loci, on unrelated individuals, the number is usually something like 1 in a quintillion. It's a number so large it stops meaning anything. You put it in the report and move on. This one came back with a match probability that made my chair squeak because I actually sat back. Somewhere on the order of 1 in several billion, which, if you're not in the field, sounds huge. In our world, that's tiny. That's a number so small it suggests the profile isn't really discriminating well, which shouldn't happen with clean data on this many loci. I opened the raw allele calls and looked at them one by one. At every locus, the profile carried allele values that were within the observed human range, but in combinations that were the rarest possible at that locus. Not once, not twice. Every locus. It's the difference between rolling a 6 on a die, which happens all the time, and rolling 26s in a row. The individual events are fine. The pattern is not. I ran the profile against CODIS. Nothing. That in itself wasn't surprising. What was surprising was that when I ran it against the population frequency tables we use for statistical weight, the profile didn't fit any of them cleanly. Not African American, not Caucasian, not Hispanic, not Asian. Not because it was mixed. Mixed samples look mixed. This looked single source in every way the software can measure. It just carried allele frequencies that didn't align with any documented population group. I made myself a coffee and I sat back down, and I told myself the sample was contaminated. Contamination was the reasonable answer. Old sample, old evidence. 22 years of somebody's DNA drifting in through gloves or an open tube. So I pulled a second aliquot from the original tube, did a clean extraction with fresh reagents, and ran it again. On a different instrument, in a different room, on the second shift so it wasn't the same technician workflow. Same result, every allele, identical, same impossible pattern. I sat in the parking garage that night for a long time before driving home. It was cold for March, and there was a security guard smoking near the stairwell, and I remember watching him because I didn't want to think about the file yet. When he saw me watching, he raised his hand in a little wave, and I waved back, and then I drove home and didn't sleep well. Third run was the following Monday. I asked another analyst, Priya, to do it blind. I didn't tell her anything about the previous results, just handed her a portion and said, run it. She did the extraction, the quant, the amplification. She came to my bench 2 days later holding a printout, and she said, "Is this a joke?" I asked what she meant. She said, "This profile is nonsense. The data is beautiful, but the profile is nonsense." I told her it wasn't a joke. I showed her my 2 previous runs. She sat down. 3 runs, 3 analysts, effectively, 2 instruments, fresh reagents each time. The result was the same to the last allele call. The sample was authentic. The chain of custody from 1999 was intact. The tube had been sealed in a state-run evidence vault for over 2 decades. This wasn't contamination from us, and it couldn't be contamination from before, because contamination doesn't produce clean single-source profiles. It produces mixtures. Whoever left this DNA in that apartment in 1999 had a genetic profile that statistically should not have belonged to a person living on Earth. I want to be clear about what I'm saying, because when I've told colleagues since, some of them have gotten it wrong. I'm not saying the DNA was fake. Fake DNA looks fake. I'm not saying it was degraded. Degraded DNA looks degraded. This was the highest quality profile I have ever generated from a cold case sample. The problem was purely that the sequence of markers, taken together, described somebody who, according to every population database we maintain, shouldn't exist. I wrote up an internal memo. Kim read it, called me into her office, closed the door, and asked me twice if I was sure. Then she asked me to write to a research institute we sometimes consult with. I won't name them. They're one of the biggest genetic research centers in the country. I drafted an email carefully. I gave them the profile, the run conditions, the instrument calibration logs, the reagent lot numbers. I did not tell them it was from a case. I said it was a validation question. They took a week. When their reply came, it was short, and it was signed by someone senior. It said the profile was, and I'm quoting from memory, theoretically possible under standard human genetics, but has not, to our knowledge, been observed in any individual currently characterized in scientific literature or in any population database available to us. They asked if we would be willing to publish jointly, framed as an anomalous finding of statistical interest. I read that email 3 times, and then I closed my laptop, and I went outside and stood in the loading dock and listened to a truck backing up somewhere on the next block. The person who left that DNA sample in that apartment in 1999 was a killer. Whoever they are, they're likely still alive. Publishing the profile as a scientific curiosity would put the exact configuration of their genome into the open literature. Any competent defense attorney would then have a citation to point to. Any halfway smart suspect would know the police were looking for someone with a profile matching a published anomaly. It would burn the case. I wrote back and told the institute we appreciated their time, but we would not be publishing. They pushed back gently. I said no. Kim backed me. That was the end of the correspondence. The tube is in the archive. I go past it sometimes when I'm looking for something else. The label is faded. The seal is intact. The subsource aliquots I generated are in a freezer on the 4th floor, tagged and logged and going nowhere. The case remains open. The original detectives are retired. New ones inherited it. They know what I found. They also know there's nothing to do with it because there is no such person to look for. Not in any database. Not in any country's system. Not in any registry that would let us narrow the search to a city, a region, a continent. Every so often, usually late in a shift, I pull the file up on my screen and look at the allele calls again. I don't know what I'm looking for. Some kind of error I missed. Some pattern that would resolve into something ordinary if I stared long enough. It never does. The numbers are what they are. Somewhere, a person walks around whose genome matches. They left that sample in an apartment in North County in 1999, and they walked out and they went on with their life. They are not in CODIS. They are not in any research database anyone has shown us. Statistically, no one on Earth carries that combination. The tube in my freezer says otherwise. The camera on the west fence had been glitching all week, so when the motion alert pinged at 1:26, I figured it was another moth on the lens. I finished my coffee before I checked. 3 hours into a 12-hour shift at a lumber and building supply yard off 27th Avenue in Phoenix, south of the airport, you learn to trust the boring answer first. When I rolled the chair over to the monitors, I saw her. She was sitting on the ground, on the outside of the fence, right up against the chain link, facing the empty lot across the road. Not leaning, not lying down, cross-legged in the dirt, with her hands in her lap. The camera is black and white and grainy, but I could tell she was young, 20 maybe, hair down past her shoulders, some kind of dress. I watched for a full minute before I moved. She didn't shift, didn't touch a phone, didn't look around. In that part of the city, at that hour, that is not how people sit. March in Phoenix is still cool at night, especially after 2:50-something. She wasn't wearing a jacket. That was the first thing that bothered me. And I want to be honest about the order of things, because the order matters. I picked up the radio, then put it back down. My supervisor works out of a call center in Tempe, and he does not want to hear from you unless somebody is actively stealing rebar. I grabbed a flashlight instead, unlocked the side door of the booth, and stepped out into the yard. The warehouse is bigger than it sounds. 2 lots, connected by a gravel corridor, with stacks of drywall and pallets of cinder block that throw long shadows under the sodium lights. It smells like sawdust and hot metal even in the dark. My boots on the gravel were the only sound for about 30 seconds. Then, way off toward the freeway, a semi shifted gears. I get paid $20 an hour to walk this loop every hour and log the cameras, and in 7 months on the job, the most interesting thing I had found was a cat that got in through a hole in the back fence. I walked the inside of the west fence until I could see her through the links, maybe 15 feet away. I didn't come out the gate. I didn't want to. I stood there with the flashlight pointed at the ground, not at her, and I said, "Ma'am, you okay?" She didn't turn her head. I tried again, a little louder. "Hey, you all right over there?" Nothing. Not a flinch. For a second, I honestly wondered if she was awake. Then I saw her chest move, slow and even, and I saw her blink. I stood there another minute. I don't know how to describe what that minute felt like. Not scared exactly. More like when you walk into a room and the temperature is wrong, and you can't figure out why yet. I keyed open the pedestrian gate and stepped through, left it open behind me, kept my distance, maybe 8 feet, and crouched down so I wasn't standing over her. "Miss, I work here. I saw you on the camera. You need me to call somebody?" She finally looked at me, just her eyes, not her head. Her eyes were dry. "I'm just tired of walking," she said. Her voice was flat, not sleepy, not drunk. Flat like she'd already used up the parts of her voice that had music in them earlier in the night. I said, "Okay." I said, "Take your time." That's when I looked down and clocked the shoes. Black flats, cheap, thin-soled. The kind you wear to an office job or a dinner. One of them had the sole peeling off at the toe. The left foot was bleeding a little where the strap had rubbed. Not a lot, but enough that the dust around it was darker. Her hands were in her lap, and her hands were shaking. Not shivering cold shaking, a finer kind. The kind you get when your body has been running on adrenaline for a long time and doesn't know how to come down. She didn't have a purse. She didn't have a phone that I could see. There was nothing next to her on the ground except a bottle cap she was turning over between 2 fingers, like it was a coin she was thinking about spending. I stood back up slowly. "I've got water in the booth," I said. "Cold. You want one?" She thought about it for what felt like a long time. Then she nodded. One small nod. I told her I'd be right back. I told her I was going to leave the gate open, and she could sit exactly where she was, and I was not going to close it on her. I don't know why I said that part. It came out of my mouth before I planned it, and looking back, I think some part of me had already understood something I hadn't put into words yet. I walked back to the booth without hurrying, grabbed 2 bottles of water from the mini fridge, and on the way out I picked up the fleece I keep on the back of the chair for the AC. The one my sister gave me for Christmas years ago, the ugly green one. I took that too. Back at the fence, I set the water down on the ground about halfway between us and slid it toward her with my foot, set the fleece next to it. Then I sat down on my side of the gravel, cross-legged, roughly the same distance from her as she was from the fence. "I'm gonna sit here for a minute," I said. "You don't have to talk." She drank about 1/3 of the bottle in one go. Then she pulled the fleece over her shoulders without putting her arms in it and sat with it hanging like a blanket. She kept turning the bottle cap in her fingers. Not the water cap, the old one she'd already had. The freeway made its freeway noise. Somewhere a dog started barking 2 streets over, and then remembered it was tired and stopped. After maybe 4 or 5 minutes, she started to talk. I'm not going to write down what she said, because it wasn't mine to hear, and it isn't mine to repeat. Here's what I can tell you. She had left a house on foot several hours earlier without a plan, and the reason she left was not the kind of reason you argue with. She named a neighborhood that was a solid 2 hours walk from where we were, in shoes made for a different night. At one point, she said the word again in a way that made me look at the gravel instead of at her, because looking at her right then would have felt like taking something from her she hadn't offered. I let her talk. When she paused, I didn't fill it. When she started again, I nodded. At some point, she stopped and said, "I don't know where I was going." I said, "That's okay. You don't have to know right this minute." I asked her, careful, if she'd be willing to let me help her get somewhere inside for the night. Not a hospital, not the cops, just a place with a bed and a locked door, and people whose whole job is that. There was one on 12th Street I knew of. I'd call ahead so she wouldn't walk in cold, and I'd pay for the cab out of my own pocket. She didn't have to pay me back, ever. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Okay." I called the shelter first. The woman who picked up sounded like she'd been awake for a long time, in a good way, if that makes sense. I told her the situation in as few words as I could. She said, "Bring her in." They had space. They would be watching for the cab. She asked if the person had ID. I looked at the woman by the fence, and she shook her head. I told the shelter no. The woman on the phone said that was fine. They could figure it out in the morning. Then I called the cab company, not an app. There's a local outfit that still answers a phone at 2 in the morning, and their drivers know the addresses I was giving. I told the dispatcher a pickup at the gate off 27th, 1 passenger, drop at the shelter, and I'd meet the driver at the fence with cash. He said 15 minutes. I sat back down on the gravel, and I told her 15 minutes. She said, "Thank you." I said, "You don't have to thank me for this." We didn't talk much after that. She finished the water. I opened the second bottle and set it next to her for the ride. When the cab pulled up, headlights washing across the fence, she stood up slower than I expected, like her legs had gone stiff from sitting. She started to hand back the fleece. I told her to keep it. She looked at me for a second, like she was going to argue, and then she just nodded and pulled it tighter. I walked her to the cab. I paid the driver up front and gave him a 20 on top, and I asked him, quietly, to make sure she went inside the front door and not just out of the car. He said, "Yes, sir," the way a man says it when he means it. She got in. She didn't wave. The cab pulled away and made a slow left onto the empty road, and the taillights disappeared behind a stack of lumber, and then behind the wall of the neighbor's lot. I stood there for a minute after. Then I walked back through the gate and locked it. The rest of the shift was nothing. I did my walks. I refilled my coffee. Around 4, the sky started doing that thing where it isn't light yet, but the black has some blue in it. And by 6, the yard foreman was pulling in with his radio too loud in his truck. Before I left, I filled out the log the way I fill it out every morning. Time in, time out, gate checks, camera notes, Incidents. Under incidents, I wrote, night without incidents. That was true. That's what it was. There's a stretch during most deliveries where the mother goes somewhere else. Not unconscious, just somewhere else. Most of them come back the second the baby cries. This one didn't. And when she did come back, she was missing about 20 minutes of her own life. I'm an OB. I work at a hospital in Charleston, West Virginia, off Kanawha Boulevard. April 2019, Thursday night into Friday morning. The kind of shift where you park in the back lot at 7 and don't see the sun again until you're driving home. The patient was a woman I'll call Rachel, 29, first pregnancy, no complications, 41 weeks in 1 day. Her husband Kyle was there, both of them small, quiet, polite in that West Virginia way where they thank you for everything, even when you're the one causing the pain. She'd been in triage since around 9 p.m. By midnight, she was 5 centimeters and asking for the epidural. By 2, she had it and was watching HGTV on the wall mount with the sound off. The midwife on with me was Denise. Denise had been catching babies since the mid-90s. Nothing surprised her. If Denise was calm, I was calm. Rachel's labor was textbook. Contractions, strong. Baby's heart rate, reactive and beautiful, tracing on the monitor, exactly the way you want. She was tired but chatty in the early hours. Talked about the nursery they'd painted, a color called morning fog, which is just gray. She laughed when she said it. Kyle held her hand and did that thing men do where they're clearly terrified and pretending to read something on their phone. Around 4:15, she started transition. That's when things get real, when the contractions stack on top of each other and she can't talk through them. Rachel handled it the way most first-time moms do, which is not gracefully but bravely. She was gripping the bed rail hard enough that the skin on her knuckles had gone yellow-white. Then, sometime around 4:40, she stopped answering me. I was asking her the usual things. Where's the pain? 1 to 10. Do you feel pressure? She was looking at the ceiling. Her face was slack in a way I don't love, so I checked the monitor first, and everything was fine. Blood pressure normal, SATs normal. Baby's heart rate a steady 140. I leaned in closer. She was talking, very quietly. I thought maybe she was praying, because sometimes they do that, or asking for her mom, which they also do more than people realize. She wasn't praying, she was listing names. I noticed because I caught the rhythm before I caught the words. It was even, spaced, like someone reading down a page. I put my ear close to her mouth and it was names, just names. First names, some old-fashioned, some ordinary. Ruth, Delbert, Marion, Franklin. Then a pause of maybe a second, and then more. Evelyn, Harlan. She wasn't slurring. She wasn't breathing hard. Between contractions, she should have been catching her breath, and she was just going, one after the next, in this steady, even voice that didn't match anything her body was doing. Denise looked at me. I looked at Denise. Denise mouthed the word, postictal? And I shook my head because Rachel hadn't had a seizure. Her eyes were open. She was tracking the ceiling tile, the one right above her head with the water stain shaped like Florida. Rachel, I said. Rachel, honey, look at me. She kept going. The names got faster. I could barely keep up. Cordelia, Vernon, something that might have been Ottilie. Then a name I definitely caught because it was so specific. Boyd. Then another. Lucille. A contraction came and her whole body went tight and the monitor peaked and she didn't stop talking. Not for 1 second. It should have broken her breath. It didn't. I want to be clear about something. I have watched people do strange things in labor. Women swear at their mothers who aren't in the room. Women sing. One woman, years ago, laughed for 20 minutes straight during pushing and could not tell me why. Labor is a very old thing, and the brain does what it wants. But this was different because it was so calm. She was not in her body. Something else was using her mouth, and it was going through a list. I did what you do. I checked her pupils, both reactive. I called out to Kyle, who was in the bathroom, and told him to come sit by her. He did, and he grabbed her hand and he said, "Rach? Rach, you good?" And she did not react to him at all. He looked up at me. I have thought about his face a lot since. He was scared, but not the kind of scared where you think your wife is dying. He was scared the way you are when you realize you don't know the person next to you as well as you thought. Denise, meanwhile, was writing. She had grabbed the little notepad we use for I and O's and was writing names down as fast as she could, not out of some plan, just because that is what Denise does when something doesn't make sense. She catalogs it. Rachel went for maybe 4 minutes. Then she stopped mid-name. Her mouth closed. She blinked. She looked at me and said, "Sorry, what did you ask me?" Her voice was completely normal, tired, a little embarrassed, like she'd zoned out. She squeezed Kyle's hand and asked for water. I asked her if she remembered what she'd just been saying. She said, "Was I saying something?" I told her she'd been talking to herself, and she laughed a little and said she must have been dreaming. She said the epidural made her feel floaty. Then a contraction hit and she was back in her body, groaning, and I had to check her, and she was complete. It was time. She pushed for 40 minutes. Baby came out pink and screaming, a girl. Kyle cried the way quiet men cry, which is silently, with his hand over his mouth. Rachel laughed and cried at the same time and said the name they'd picked. I won't write it here. It's not a rare name, but it isn't common either. Something like a grandmother's name. She said they'd kept it secret from everyone, even both sets of parents, because Kyle's mother had opinions, and they didn't want to fight about it before the baby was here. I nodded and smiled and did my job. Delivered the placenta, checked for tears, all routine. Denise weighed the baby, wrapped her. It was 5:52 a.m. The sun was coming up over the parking deck. I did not tell Rachel what she'd been saying. I did not tell Kyle either. I finished my shift and I went home. I lived alone at the time, in an apartment on the south side, and I sat at my kitchen table with the notepad Denise had given me at the end of the shift. She had handed it to me and said, "You keep that. I don't want it." She didn't say anything else. I sat down and I wrote out every name I could remember, on top of the ones Denise had caught. I wrote until I couldn't remember anymore. When I counted them, there were 22. The last one I wrote, the one I remembered clearest because I'd heard it twice in the sequence, was the name Rachel had given her daughter an hour later. I stared at that piece of paper for a long time. Then I made coffee and stared at it some more. The apartment had this bad fluorescent bulb in the kitchen that hummed, and the fridge was humming too, and I remember thinking the room sounded busy in a way it usually didn't. I did not go back to Rachel. She had her follow-ups with her regular OB, not me. I saw her name in the discharge notes 2 days later. Baby doing well, mother doing well. No mention of anything. I never asked her about the names. I thought about it. For weeks I thought about it. I would draft the conversation in my head while I was scrubbing in. I would picture calling her and asking, gently, if there was a family list, if her grandmother had told her stories. But every time I got close, I stopped, because I didn't want her to know. She had a new baby. She was happy. Whatever had come through her that night had left, and I did not want to be the one who reminded it that she existed. I burned the list, not dramatically. I took it out to the little charcoal grill on my balcony one Sunday, and I set it on fire with a lighter, and I watched it curl up and go black. It smelled like any other paper burning. I kept one name in my head, not the baby's, a different one, the Boyd one actually. I had heard it clearly, and it stuck. I don't know why I picked that one. Maybe because it was the least modern. I Googled it. Just the first name and Charleston, West Virginia. Nothing came up the first few tries. Then, months later, I got bored one night and added a year range, and I found an obituary. Local paper. A man with that first name died in 1987, right here in Charleston. He was 68. He had worked at a chemical plant on the river. He had 4 children, all listed by name. None of the 4 children's names were on my list. I checked. I kept Googling him for about a year. Not often, every couple of months. I would look at the obituary and read it again. He had lived, and he had died, and that was all the internet had on him. Around April of 2020, I stopped. There wasn't a reason. I just noticed one day that I hadn't checked in a while, and I decided not to start again. Rachel's daughter would be turning 6 this spring. I hope she is a normal kid. I hope she likes school and has friends, and never has any reason to hear the other 21 names. I still work labor and delivery. I have caught a lot of babies since that night. None of the mothers have ever done anything like that again, and I have stopped expecting them to. But when a woman goes quiet during transition and stares at the ceiling, I don't lean in close anymore. I stand back, and I let her have her minute. Whatever she's saying, I'd rather not hear it. So that's today's episode wrapped up. Tell me in the comments which story stayed with you, and help the channel out with a like if it did. Some 4chan threads are easy to scroll past, but others leave something behind once you've read them. That uneasy feeling usually has a reason. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.